Hi, everybody.
Hi.
We got to give everybody a little more time to come in, but it's nice to see everybody, familiar faces and returning faces. Oh, I'm going to put it.
Hi, Jim and Beth.
Hi, Amy. Long time no see.
We're so excited for you to
Don't get too
present.
excited. Hi, Marty. Hello, Marjorie. Put on your video.
Obviously, we have a tough host tonight when she's insisting.
I'm really harsh because I'm proud.
We're proud too.
I bet you are. I know you. I know all of you.
Of you.
Ruth, put on your video. Don't just lurk. How about user? Who's user? I'm a user.
We have a take no prisoners host tonight, obviously.
I'm tough, but I'm kind.
Hi, Ruth. Oh,
She left.
hi, Thelma. Oh, I didn't send it to you?
Oh, all right. Hi, I unmuted. Good to see you, David. Everybody else too.
Oh, I guess everyone should mute so that I can, be the one who is yapping at first, and I don't hear your dogs. You only hear my dogs. And then when I'm done, everybody can, unmute according to whether you want to speak or not. Does that sound right, David?
Yes, that sounds fine. And why don't we give people one more minute to come
Yeah.
in, and then we can start. I know people were coming in at various times last time. Who is M? I could figure out who most of the people are.
It says Martine Shahar. Hi, Martine.
Oh, hi, Martine.
And then there's
Hi, sorry, I'm just in the middle of dinner, so I didn't want to turn off
That
the
is
thing.
that is totally fine.
but who's user? I want to know who user is because I've known a lot of users in my life.
I know somebody told me, oh, hi, Enoch. See that?
Hey, Dave. Hey, Dave.
Oh, so yes, I'm going waiting because people keep coming. Oh, Ellie Herman has just come on.
That girl. Mm.
I saw Kathy. Oh, there she is. Everyone keeps moving their squares on my thing.
the
Hi,
way it
Mom.
works. It's like Hollywood Squares.
It kind of is, but
You don't teach apparently, because that's what happens the whole time. You're
Yeah.
teaching.
And then
Squares
everyone
is
tries to say, oh, we'll go from left to right, but nobody's
Right, no.
the same.
all right. Well, as people keep coming on, I will welcome everybody and do my plug for the things that I do. Hi, Darcy and Andy. So many of you I haven't seen in many months, so it's nice to see you again. I'm David Levinson. I know many or most of you, and welcome to the second in our session of 7D, the seven deadly sins. Can't live with them, can't live without them. Before I forget, we are recording this in case anyone has a problem with that. Just so you know. So anything that you say is recorded for posterity, and then we put it on YouTube. As I mentioned, this is a new thing for us at Big Sunday to do something like this. I've wanted to do it for years, and we did the first session last month with Marty Kaplan, who I saw, which was Wrath, which was I thought it was a great session, and Marty did a wonderful job, and it was a very interesting and lively pre-election discussion. And so now we're geared up for Pride. So next month in time for the holidays will be Gluttony, which seems appropriate, and that will be run by Haipin Im, who is the founder of and president of the Korean Churches for Community Development. Many of you may know Haipin. She's great and always interesting and fun. Also, with Big Sunday, I have to do the plug. This is a very busy time of year for us. I'll stick to one thing, which is that our big Thanksgiving event, which many of you have participated in, is coming up. We're doing it online this year, obviously, on a week from Sunday. It's the annual Big Sunday stuffing event. We're filling 2,000 bags full of Thanksgiving food for grateful and hungry people all over town. Next Sunday from 4 to 5. If you sign up, we'll give you a link. If you want to help us with the food collection, I'll say thank you very much. We could definitely use it. And the other thing, if any of you are interested, is part of it is we're having videos on there where people, usually if you're at the event, everybody fills out a card what they're thankful for this year, and we hang them all over the place. We can't do that. So we're asking people to make short videos, up to like 30 seconds, what you're thankful for this year. I can take an educated guess what many of you might be thankful for, but feel free to say whatever you like. And I need those ASAP. So we'd love to have you. Should be a lot of fun. We are hoping to bring the warmth and friendliness and giving spirit of our Thanksgiving event online. So I hope any or all of you guys can join us. All right. So let me introduce this. I'm very excited to do this. My dear and old friend, Amy Wilentz, is leading our discussion tonight on pride. And I'm just going to read this that I've already written about Amy that you have read to get you here tonight. The session is led by Amy, who's awesome. Amy's an American journalist and writer. She is a professor of English at the University of California at Irvine, where she teaches in the literary journalism program. She received the 2013 National Book Critics Circle Award for her memoir, Farewell, Fred Voodoo, A Letter from Haiti, which I highly recommend if you haven't read it, and recently won a 2020 Guggenheim Fellowship in General Nonfiction. Amy was the Jerusalem correspondent for The New Yorker and is a contributing editor at The Nation. She's also a longtime friend to Big Sunday, and she's loads of fun, and I'm glad she's my friend. So with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Amy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's really nice to be here and nice to talk about one of my favorite sins, although I have so many. I really wanted envy. I begged David to give it to me, but somebody else got there first because envy's like my favorite sin, or anyway, the one I commit most. But I got pride, which is pretty good. And I think it's a good thing to think about right now. And there are a lot of ways to think about pride. There's one type of pride that I'm fixated on right now. I can't say why. And that is overweening, baseless pride about oneself for no discernible reason. It's rare that we encounter this, but it does exist in certain human outliers. Usually it's children who are braggarts and preeners because they're insecure and they haven't really learned the norms of interpersonal behavior yet. But some of these kids become adults without changing. At best, these people become bullies and show-offs, the loudmouth at every meeting or at every dinner, the big bore who likes to tell you about everything he's done and everyone he knows and everything he owns, and also about all of his fantastic, beautiful, incredible, amazing ideas. And at worst, these people become harassers and assaulters. I think you know who I'm talking about here. And I'll get back to him. But pride happens to be a really good sin for this difficult political moment. Here are the other kinds of pride. Number one, as a deadly sin, it involves man's desire to disobey, to imitate, or to compete with God and his rule. Hubris is part of this, and I'll elaborate that later. Two, there's a lesser, more human kind of pride, quiet pride in one's achievements, pride in one's children's achievements. I feel this about all of my children. There are these things that these things are the ones that in Yiddish make us kvel or give us naches. We know, though, that if we brag about them, that makes our pride repugnant to others. Silent but prideful. It's a thing. My aunt, like so many aunts, was not silent on the subject of her kids, my cousins. She had 4 kids, and John was her baby. He was about 40 at the time I paid a visit to his mother, who was living alone. So my aunt and I are watching a tennis tournament on TV together one afternoon during my visit to her. And she goes, "Oh, I just love Roger Federer." And I say, yeah, he's a really good player. And she goes, no, no, no. I mean, he's so handsome. He's just so good looking. And I say, yeah, yeah, he is. And she says, well, he looks just like John. So that's the kind of pride I'm talking about here. People also sometimes take pride in their own goodness, their self-sacrifice, their charity or empathy. It's not exactly right to take pride in this stuff, right? But many of us do. Also, can I just add at this juncture that it seems to me that fake humble is as bad as boastful proud. So if I have to hear another Oscar winner go up on stage and say right off the bat in front of an audience of millions with his hair and her makeup perfected and a fabulous outfit, how humbled he or she feels to be receiving the biggest, most prestigious and most lucrative reward in the movie industry, I will absolutely plots. That actor doesn't feel humble. That actor feels proud and very, very happy. Disregard the Buddhist praying hand in front of the humble heart. 3, here's the third kind of pride. There's pride in identity, especially for racially, culturally, sexually, or economically marginalized people and groups. As in Gay Pride Month, to take one very explicit example, or the cry in the 1960s, say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. It's funny about pride as a sin. We have so many different ways of thinking of pride. In this third kind of pride, when you say a person is proud, you don't mean that they're flawed in our culture. Sometimes, rather than a deadly sin, you imagine a proud person as someone upright, who refuses to be bowed, who in the face of despair stands firm, her eyes focused perhaps somewhat skeptically on the far horizon, her children and babies gathered around her, the shack behind her. We've all seen Dorothea Lange's photographs. Believing in her ability to weather another day and rise above her circumstances, or at least survive them. She's proud. What we really mean by proud in this instance is that such proud people have had to put up with their condition and with the way others treat them, with slurs, disses, microaggressions, and condescension, to say nothing of harassment, assault, and outright attack. And yet they have not lost sight of their humanity, even when others have. We honor this kind of pride, don't we? Because it's not really pride as the deadly sin, but rather resilience and toughness and a willingness to confront adversity and injustice. It's holding your head up to be counted as fully human. 4th, pride in genetic attributes or gifts, excuse me. This is my favorite one because it's the one I commit the most and everybody I know commits the most. I'm thinking about my grandmother here, who was very boastful about living to be 100 years old. She liked to point to rich dead men and count the number of years that she'd lived beyond them. I bet he'd give a few million to have 16 more years, she would say. She was always counting. Also, among my friends, what are the things about which we have pointless pride or a kind of smugness about gifts we have for no reason? Being born with money, having naturally wavy hair, 20/20 eyesight, straight teeth, being thin or tall or appropriately curvy, having a good digestive system, being really, really smart, having low blood pressure, but not too low, having deep brown eyes or bright blue eyes, having the best hair, thick and glossy, as well as wavy, being good at languages, having only one hot flash during menopause. This was my other aunt. All these reasons for pride are foolishness, of course. Pride in anything that is a personal or a physical gift will always be undermined by age if you're lucky enough to get old. If nothing else destroys your self-pride during your lifetime, the humiliation of dying will certainly do so. But okay, let's get to the heart of it. Pride as a sin begins with myths and biblical tales. Pride is the original sin. It's kind of the best sin you could have. I mean, I'm really lucky. I don't want to say I'm proud, but I'm kind of lucky to get pride because it's the biggest sin. According to St. Augustine, I mean, it does gluttony, pride is better. According to St. Augustine, a man who came to his belief in God a little late, pride consists in humans' attempts to have what God has, knowledge, and especially knowledge of good and evil. In the biblical sense, pride is what brings about man's fall from innocent obedience to guilty disobedience, and thus the loss of paradise. So the story of Adam and Eve is the original iteration in Judeo-Christian culture of this basic narrative of human pride. I'm sure you all know the story, but I will just refresh it in your memories. It's such a good one. Basically, God said to these two, whom he had created, here, check it out. You can have everything you see and enjoy everything here. There's only one thing in the world you can't do, and that's eat the fruit of that tree over there in the middle of the garden. What a test. Now, what would any child do? Plus, of course, the serpent was there to explain to the two befuddled creatures the reason to eat the forbidden fruit. The serpent came to tempt them, to turn them away from God. He said, and I quote, God knows that when you eat that fruit, your eyes will open and you will be like gods and you will know good and evil. By the way, a little question, who put the serpent there, Lord? Here's a hint, another quote. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field, which the Lord God had made. Okay, so Eve quite rationally, persuaded by this devilish argument, and noticing that the tree was both pretty and its fruit looked good, ate some. I'm paraphrasing quite liberally from Genesis. And she gave some to Adam, who also partook, as you all know. And their eyes were open and they noticed that they were completely naked, and they hid themselves with ill-fashioned clothes that they made themselves. And then the Lord came down and ridiculously they tried to hide from him. So when God realizes the two people know that they're naked and are afraid of him, he knows immediately what they've been up to. So he punishes the serpent for luring Eve into eating the fruit and makes him go upon his belly and eat dust all the days of his life. He gives Eve childbirth and pain, as we know, and announces that her husband will rule over her. And Adam's punishment is to sweat while tilling the earth to get bad food. Then God, in his wisdom, puts some better clothes on Adam and Eve, clothes that he makes himself, and basically kicks them out of the house. No more fruit of that tree or of any other tree inside the garden for them. But the deed is done. No uneating that apple. So for me, the lesson of this story, which so many smarter and more learned people have analyzed before me, is that pride, by freeing us from thoughtlessness and fueling our free will, brings us from ignorance into knowledge and from innocence to experience. I'm on the side of the serpent. I'm sorry that you're taping me, but I am. By the way, John Milton wrote Paradise Lost, quote, to justify the ways of God to man, unquote, but ended up turning Satan, the prideful archangel who challenges God, into his most real and most profound character. The sin of pride, in this sense, creates the world we all live in. We call it the fall of man, but we might also call it the beginning of history, art, and science. Our pride takes us from paradise and childish enslavement to a capricious, though generous leader, and moves us into a harsh world where we can be adults and have agency of our own. The story of Adam and Eve's pride and their fall from grace says to me exactly what it's not supposed to say, which is that all the goods of the world and all its satisfactions are as nothing if you can't have freedom and wisdom. So pride creates our world and makes us thirst to be all-knowing, like God. Here are two pre-monotheistic stories about the pride that leads us into competition with the gods and the consequences of that. Prometheus was a titan and thus a godlike creature himself. He was not unlike the serpent of monotheistic lore because he offered man agency and choice and a path to knowledge. He stole the fire of Olympus and gave it to mankind for humans' advancement. And for this, he was sorely punished by the great god Zeus. Gods are very jealous of their own rule and power. Just reminding you, there's a reason we say God-fearing. Even the one God, Adonai, is protective of his unique stature, as we see in the story of Eden. I can't remember a story of a shy and retiring God. Anyway, the Prometheus story was largely taken as a lesson to humans not to attempt great feats of craft and technology, the kinds of things that fire enables. Then there's the famous story of Daedalus and Icarus. Daedalus, who forges the great wings that will allow men to fly, and his son Icarus, who puts on the wings and flies too near the sun. The two are punished for their hubris by Apollo, the sun god, who melts the wax that holds together the boy's wings and sends him plunging to his death in the sea, and who punishes the father with the son's death. This story is largely taken as a lesson about art and creating versions of reality that too closely resemble God's work. See James Joyce's Stephen Daedalus in Portrait of the Artist and in Ulysses, a character who is both Daedalus, the artificer father, and his bold boy. I always take the Icarus story to heart, the outrageous hubris of flying. Come on. I just want to ask, if there is one person among us tonight who does not feel occasionally that it's an affront to God, or to nature at least, when we take off in an airplane. And I'm not even a believer, but Icarus's Apollo is still up there looking at our speeding metal tube with raised eyebrows, thinking about appropriate punishment for pride. Okay, I personally, as you can see, am a fan of pride insofar as it is this big, nasty, original sin of trying to establish a man or a woman as a being whose curiosity and intelligence spurs them to action. Pride, in other words, makes us human as we conceive of that now. So we can think of pride also as a character flaw that creates, and always has created since Eden, narrative and plot. Pride, as it says in Proverbs, and you all know this, goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. For God resisteth the proud and giveth grace to humility. Except if it's an actor on Oscar night. So we have all the prideful kings of Shakespeare's work, and on down through the prideful men of the Bronte sisters, and of Trollope and Hardy and Steinbeck and Robert Penn Warren and Toni Morrison, and so many others the world over. Without pride, there is no fall. And without those two elements, there is no tragic narrative. Not all, or even most of the heroes who are overthrown because of their tragic flaw, as hubris is known, are evil, but they are all prideful. King Lear, a huge character of great depth, is proud, almost comically so, but he's not evil. Yet his pride causes betrayal, blindness, madness, suicide, war, and general mayhem, death, and destruction. And still at the end, this man who was undone by crazy pride is capable of great insight in his madness. Here are the final words of this formerly proud man to his wronged and doomed daughter Cordelia. We two alone will sing like birds in the cage. When thou dost ask me blessing, I'll kneel down and ask of thee forgiveness. So we'll live and pray and sing and tell old tales and laugh at gilded butterflies and hear poor rogues talk of court news. And we'll talk with them too, who loses and who wins, who's in, who's out, and take upon us the mystery of things as if we were God's spies. Interestingly, hubris was not originally a simple noun meaning overweening pride. Hubris was a minor god. Yes, she was. Hubris is a Greek microgoddess, a daemon, representing pride, insolence, recklessness, and luxuriousness. Of course, she was very seductive and was thought to be married to a god of war. Aesop wrote that if a place should give itself over to hubris, reckless, overweening pride, and insolence and luxuriousness, war would surely follow. I thought I would quote this next bit because, again, it shows how the varying types of pride really apply to this moment in our national life. It's from Wikipedia on hubris in classical Athenian law. Here it is. Hubris in law was defined as the use of violence to shame the victim, and rape was considered to be a part of its weaponry. Aristotle defined hubris as shaming the victim, not to spare yourself an injury or to avenge an injury, but merely for your own gratification. As for the pleasure in hubris, its cause is this: naive men think that by ill-treating others, they make their own superiority the greater. Something about this last bit of the definition reminds me clearly of Donald Trump and his tweets and his history of assaults on women. Also, it amuses me in thinking about Trump and hubris to remember that this micro-goddess's Latin name is Petulantia, or petulance. I kept flashing on Trump as I put together these thoughts about pride. Trump's behavior as a whole is what we often mean when we speak disparagingly of someone's pride or of his boastful conceitedness. It's like Mr. Darcy's pride in Pride and Prejudice, unfounded, meaningless, somewhat cruel, condescending, and not even based on physical or mental gifts. By the way, I'm not trying to say that Trump is anything like Darcy in any other way. You won't find graceful, sparkling actors like Colin Firth playing Donald Trump. And you apparently will never find Donald Trump acknowledging that his feelings of superiority are wrong, as Darcy does. But I want to think with you about what this kind of pride means and why it's damaging to others, to anyone who comes near it. Trump's pride is pure hubris as the demigod embodies it. Remember, bullying, attacking victims merely for your own gratification, and believing that by treating others badly, you glorify yourself. Again, hubris can be so grandiose that it verges on the comic. Like Lear, Trump does this, but Lear is a majestically tragic and blinded leader, while Trump has been fooled by his own lack of judgment, plus being surrounded by lackeys and yes men in awe of money, into believing he is great. His preening fatuous pride and the 71 million votes he got say something profound and disturbing about the state of the nation. And I hope that perhaps we can reflect on that a little bit tonight. And then there are all the baseless claims of greatness that he makes. Here are a few of the most infamous of Trump's prideful yet ridiculous statements for you to think about as we move into the discussion part of this Zoom. This was the one that began it all. I alone can fix it. Then there's the really funny one. I am a very stable genius. And my personal favorite, I had an uncle who went to MIT, who is a top professor, Dr. John Trump, a genius. It's in my blood. I'm smart. Okay, I am done, folks. So I would love to take any questions you might have and hear any thoughts you might have about the ranting that I just went through. You can raise your hands. You can unmute. David.
So I wasn't sure whether Jim had a question or not. I was just applauding. So assuming that the opposite of pride is humility, is that to be like, if hubris and humility must come from the same thing, whatever that happens to be?
I'm not sure that's true.
It's not, they're not from the same.
Hubris and humility from the same root?
They probably are. But
David, don't jump to conclusions.
okay, but there's this sense that pride is negative, but humility is positive. Or pride, what is your take on that? Is humility always good or
Well, false humility is really repugnant, as I was trying to say about the actors who do that thing. They all come up one after another and say how humbled they are to be there getting the best award they've ever gotten in their entire lives. I don't even take it at face value at all. I think it's a lie. They think it's true, so maybe there's that's okay. But I think, so humility isn't always good if it's false, and pride isn't always good if it's real. It's like that. Pride is a bad thing in its definition as a deadly sin. And there's a reason why it's a deadly sin. I happen to like it because it made man free of God. But that was exactly why God didn't like it. And that's why in the Catholic Church, it's a deadly sin, because it's an act of rebellion against God. Maybe not very conscious. It's not clear that Eve really thought about it as an act of rebellion, but essentially it was, and that's why they were banished from Eden.
So where's the line between pride and self-esteem? Self-esteem seems like it's a positive thing. We all want to have self-esteem. It's a virtue that we try to instill in our children. But at what point does self-esteem veer into pride?
Self-esteem, I think, and I'd be happy to have others join in this conversation, but I think self-esteem, as we look at it today in the kind of psychological therapy world, is esteeming yourself at your own real value. So not to denigrate yourself or to feel that you're not worthy of being valued, but also not to overdo it. And then that morphs into pridefulness, to overdo it or to esteem yourself beyond all others. I think that's the problem. Now there's someone else, but he's typing. David Weber is typing, and that's why unmuted, I hear him typing.
Oh.
David, are you going to ask me a question? I hope so.
No, I can ask you a question. Wait, I got it. Oh, I'm unmuted. Yeah.
You're unmuted, so
it's not what I was typing, but it's not a question, but your talk did on the value of pride was making me think, especially for those of us who watch basketball and baseball with our fine teams.
Right.
you're constantly hearing, I got pride in myself. It's actually put forth as one of the prime values a lot.
The
Like,
players say that.
The players say it. I mean, you say, take pride in the way you look, go out, come on. I take pride in my work. I take pride. Yeah. I mean, LeBron James probably said it about 10 times,
Meaning I take pride in how well I play, or I
Well,
take.
no, it's they're taking pride in the effort that got to this place, this lofty position.
Right. So that's taking
it's
pride.
a little different than I'm just saying, I'm not arguing it one way or another.
No,
I'm
but
just saying you reminded me that it is, even though it's in our list of deadly sins, it is often, especially for parents, like used as one of the attributes you should have if you're going to get.
I'm just so interested in how the name of a deadly sin became something that we all feel is a valuable thing also. And I'm interested especially in the idea of sports people taking pride in this, because I feel that there's an especially meaningful part of their bonding, that it's a team thing. So it's not just LeBron, who is notably a proud person.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Taking pride
And then
in
it
how
connected
well
with
he shoots and
Black
how,
Lives Matter.
then it comes
LeBron.
along with the marginalized people's pride. So I think there's a lot of complexity to the idea of pride, actually. That's why I enjoyed doing this research so much. I mean, it was so interesting, especially in the era of Trump, where you see the worst kind of pride right alongside with the Black Lives Matter stuff that is really the most valuable kind of pride that lifts people up and makes them feel valued. It's complicated, definitely.
Amy, James has their hand up.
Okay, James.
That's Jim. Sorry.
Jim. Oh, hi, James.
Hi.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting talking about teams and competition, because most of my understanding of pride from the theater, sort of begins with the Oedipus story. And Oedipus eventually blinds himself. And one of the things that I think maybe how we differentiate from the sin of pride from sort of a pride in one's achievements is that you can't be blind to your limitations. And Oedipus was blind to the fact that maybe there really was something wrong with him, or the truth of the oracle was wrong. And then in the end, he actually physically blinds himself, because the truth of his limitation and the truth of his fate is more than he can stand.
Oh, disaster.
So it's good to be proud of your family, but if you're so proud of your family that you think that your kids don't have limitations and are better basketball players than LeBron James when they don't practice enough and they don't have a lot of the skills and the determination that he has, you can encourage them to try, but they need to be realistic and not blind.
So maybe there's an element in what perhaps we'd come to think of as proper pride that is an element of humility. And I think maybe that element of humility is recognizing the humanity of others. Yeah. So that you're not on your own saying, I am the greatest. And even when Muhammad Ali said, I am the greatest, there was an element of his understanding what that meant exactly. Mm-hmm. But you're not just saying, I'm the greatest, no one else can compete with me, no one else is as good as I am. And if you have that kind of pride where you don't recognize the humanity of others and your own real humanity, then you're fine. You won't ever blind yourself because you're already blind. But if you're like Oedipus and you don't and you've come to recognize that, then that's when you blind yourself because you can't stand the mess you've made. Maybe I'm just, theorizing here.
Ellie has her hand up.
Yes, Ellie.
Why, hello. So I am wondering about the relationship between pride and shame. When shame is not one of our deadly sins, to my knowledge. But
shame is good. Shame is good, according to the people who developed the idea of the deadly sins.
Which is, all right, that's another night. So we have to have an eighth night.
Yeah.
But I feel that these two qualities are intertwined. And when I think about the really corrosive kinds of pride that we're talking about, they often are based in shame. I mean, I can't help but feel that someone like Donald Trump, I'm sorry to mention that name, but
We have already.
the behavior that we see is rooted in this feeling of profound inadequacy. I mean, he has rarely been as like overtly prideful as he is now in his failure. And if I think of anybody who is prideful to a disturbing degree, they often seem to be driven by this
Insecurity.
great sense of shame. And on the flip side, when I think of people I've known, and this has often been teenage students of mine who don't have enough pride. I remember teaching students like that one of the hardest sentences I could ever ask them to complete was, "I'm proud of myself because."
Oh,
And that also was related to a deep feeling of shame that a lot of them seem to carry. So I'm just curious really about the relationship between these two qualities.
okay. So thinking out loud, your student who, when you say, complete this sentence, can't think of why they're proud of themselves. If I'm judging from my own students, they're reluctant to say why they're proud of themselves, if they are, because they're well brought up and they know that you shouldn't say why you're proud of yourself. On the other hand, the shameless, that's what we call people like Trump. But Trump is not the only person any of us has ever known who acts like this, okay? As I said in my talk, there's the big talker at the dinner party. There's the one who wants to tell you everything he owns, everyone he's had sex with, we know these people. They're shameless. I agree that when you're confronted with one of these people, and may I say, they happen to be, in my experience, often men, because men are forced into this thing where they have to be grand, but they feel themselves small. So you get this feeling of overcompensation, sure, but it's not exactly shame. And I think Trump, I've read a little bit about Trump because I did this podcast called The Children's Hour, where I talk about the Trump family. So I've read about Trump's childhood, and I think what happened to him was it's arrested development. At a toddler age, he was then told he's the best Trump baby, he's the nicest Trump baby, he's the cutest Trump baby, he's the blondest Trump baby, he can do whatever he wants, and then he kept on doing it. So I don't buy his shame. Shame is too good a feeling for him ever to have had it. He feels unlimited, permitted everything, I think. But who am I to judge? I'm no shrink.
Amy, I think Marty had a question.
Hi, Marty.
Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for doing this. Your favorite sin, envy. I'm wondering why you chose pride, for example, as the sin of Adam and Eve. I'd always thought of them as being envious of what God had. And there are so many Greek myths. A version of Prometheus is that humans envied the fire and what it gave them. The story of Babel, people envied God's heaven, and so they reached up to it. There's pride in that too. I'm just wondering how you separate the two.
First of all, David wouldn't give me envy. Someone else already had it. But also because Augustine talked about pride in terms of the fall from grace in the Garden of Eden. And I think also because the purveyor of the pride is the serpent, and the serpent is the animal embodiment of Lucifer, and Lucifer is the grand archangel who fought against God in what was certainly prideful. And so he was encouraging Adam and Eve to the same kind of pride that he had had, that they could put themselves on the same level with God. And to me, yeah, sure, it's envy, but I don't think, when I consider that story as I told it to you, and that's the way I really feel about the story, And I know that I debased it a lot and took away its grandeur, but I don't think that they were capable of envy. So the other stories, sure. The other stories are not about these innocent beings in their first existence. But Adam and Eve didn't know envy. They knew fruit and they knew this serpent, and they were proud enough to think they could go against God's directive. So proud that once they got the version of good and evil, they thought they could hide from God. I mean, the story is a little bit like a Richard Pryor scene when he's running away after he breaks the vase in his aunt's living room, the old Chinese vase. And he's, first of all, I wasn't running. That's what Adam and Eve remind me of in this scene.
Next up is Ruth.
Ruth,
Yes,
I don't see you, Ruth.
I'm
Hi.
there I am, Amy.
Good.
Okay, so I did a little research before this because I knew
Because
nothing
you're prideful, prideful.
seven deadly sins. But I did learn this, that pride is the greatest sin. Dante tells us this, a lot of people tell us this. And why is it the greatest sin? It's the greatest sin because it elevates us over God, or it elevates us over an authority that we should consider greater than us. So in this sense, Trump is certainly an example of pridefulness, but he's prideful because he elevates himself over the law, and he elevates himself over tradition, American tradition for 200, 300 years, and he elevates himself over what is established in our country, not because he's psychologically inadept or psychologically troubled or psychologically damaged.
Can't know that. He's doing it for two reasons and maybe more. We can't really know.
You're interrupting me. I'm joking.
But who's boss? I'm the authority you have to bow down before, unless you're prideful.
You're not, no, you're not God. You're
No,
just
but
a commentator.
no, I take your point, and I think it's really smart about Trump, and I think he's given too many excuses because of his psychology. But I do believe that, and if you look at most of the great tragic heroes who are brought down by pride and hubris, there are, and Ruth, I know because I've read things with you, you would be the first to notice the psychological reasons behind their fall. Now, I hate to say about Trump, but I will say it, and I think I'll have a large audience to agree with me. He's not like King Lear, and he's not like any of the great tragic figures ever. He's much more rudimentary and low. But I think there are psychological reasons. I think there are reasons of advisors who.
I just don't want to, this is my last comment.
Go ahead.
I just don't want to reduce a 7 deadly sin to psychological incapacity due to a bad father. Really, what we're looking at is something bigger. And if you look at the ultimate hubristic figure, someone like Ajax, I mean, they're really standing up and saying, I'm greater than the gods who put me here, and I am the great hero, not you, me.
Right,
and
right.
That is what Trump does. But starting to attribute it to his psychological, weaknesses or his psychological problems because he had a terrible father and an absent mother and the Mary Trump story, I think brings it down to a micro level that doesn't really say, look, I'm above it all. And that's the deadly sin that Dante was describing. Anyway, thank you for your time.
Interestingly, you mentioned the bad father. Now, I think if you look at the story of Adam and Eve and God, look at them as a family, I can't imagine a worse father. Someone who says, here's the one thing you can't do, kids, and then goes off. I mean, so yeah, you could call it psychologizing, but I think it's also Trump hates anything that looks like it's more powerful than he is. Other questions, thoughts? David?
I was saying, I said in the sidebar, I actually think that Adam and Eve's sin was one of gluttony. That like I don't think that
like
God
that.
was a really bad guy. He set some rules. If he's the father figure, he set some rules, which is perfectly reasonable. And with what Adam and Eve, they had a pretty nice thing going, but they wanted more. And even when told they couldn't have it, they took it anyway. So that, I mean, you could argue, you could
David.
make an argument for any of the 7 deadly sins going on in Eden. Certainly lust was very much there, and you could make an argument for envy, but I would.
And sloth.
Yeah, just about any of them. I mean, the sloth, we all missed out on it. It would have been.
Well, I guess I took off from, and perhaps this is hard with this audience, but I took off from the Catholic concepts of the deadly sins. And that seems to have attributed, maybe only through Augustine, but I don't think so, pride as the central sin of Adam and Eve. But I could be wrong about that, because I don't know from Christian religion.
Right, and I'm not your authority either on that, but looking at it through a modern lens,
Right.
it would seem like by our standards, that's what that would be.
You know what else I would say? Those guys committed all the sins because they were the first humans and they were ready to
They
commit
got us
everything,
ready.
because that's what part of what makes us human. And that's why this is a great series. Jim and Beth seem to have their hands raised. Unmute.
Hi, it's Beth. I really liked, Amy, your transition to talking about the deadly sin as, from a humanistic point of view, that it allowed Adam and Eve to have imagination, and therefore moving forward allowed our sort of storytelling of our self-reflection on our failings. And I wanted to correlate that to the nuanced idea of pride and deadly sins. Instead of the black and white, it's either or. And I remember my mom was actually a therapist. And when one of our kids was in high school, she was adamant and very boastful about not wanting to drink and do drugs and whatever the trend was at the time. And Jim had mentioned, she sounds so self-righteous, which is a cousin of pride, about it, like, she's not allowing for other kids to have their experience. She sounds so judgmental and superior, and it bothered him. And my mom's response was that pride and self-assurance, as long as it's placed in a proper value, is what allows kids to grow up and individuate and think they're better than their parents, and their parents don't know anything, which is the Adam and Eve story. And then they go to college and they get brought down to earth again, and there's people smarter than them and more talented than them and prettier and taller and wavy haired than them, whatever the story is. And then I think it's interesting. Then we have kids, and then this pride again. Oh my God, look at our baby. Look at it. She said this and she said that. And there's a very human response that I'm having to these deadly sins, or a desire to look at it from the human experience of value-based learning and identity, rather than just, because for me, Donald Trump has a psychosis. It's almost like other kids born into that same circumstance might have been okay.
Yes, and they were.
So it's like I can't even push him to include him in my discussion of something that's a very interesting character trait. So
well,
it's one that I appreciate you embracing, instead of just as maybe, because wrath seemed to be a little harsh. Pride seems to have a little more color for me.
Pride is very complicated in our culture now. I think it was not always complicated. I think, democratic socialism made the rebellion against the all-knowing, all-powerful leader a lot less possible and a lot less laudable than it was in much earlier times when pride was declared to be a deadly sin. And that we're all dealing with different ways of describing things. And we use the word pride, but maybe there are other words that could be used too. It might not have to be Gay Pride Month. but there might be another word so that we're not confusing it with the deadly sin. But I think by now it has become, the idea of the deadly sin of pride has become so debased and rejected, really, that most of us see pride more like an identity thing and holding your head high and having the courage of your convictions until you're confronted with someone like Trump.
And let me just, I keep thinking of the quote of I forget what his position was, riding in with Caesar, saying all glory is fleeting, that the pride was okay as long as you know all glory is fleeting, as long as you continue to recognize this doesn't make me, as you said, better than another human necessarily. This is just a moment and I can enjoy it, but I have to have that servant whispering in my ear, all glory is fleeting, Caesar. So.
Right. So that's why we think about Oedipus understanding what is happening to him finally, or what David said about humility mixed with pride, that you have to combine them. David Weber, did you raise your hand? Oh, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I got it. Okay. Yeah. No, this whole discussion starting from the beginning, I actually am coming to this notion that Adam and Eve and the whole pride thing is a metaphor for raising a family and kids getting their independence. And that teaching is the same thing. And here I'm going to get, well, I'll wait till my disturbing, it'll disturb you guys, but in a good way. But, you know, this is the fancy Greek I know a few, I took a little tiny bit, that pedagogy comes from the root child, because it's to childize. So to push you down with that, you know, to like take away your pride, and then you can be brought back up when you're educated. But when you're educated, you go out into the world and you're independent. And I do think that's the metaphor. Okay, here's the Trump thing, because it wouldn't be me if so don't forget The Apprentice. And how many years was that? And what is the Apprentice, where it's like you're trying to avoid, he's God, and he says you're fired, which is, you know, everybody loved it. Really why he's president. Right. But he was the teacher, if you ever watched it, teaching them how to become a wealthy man like you, and like knocking them down, knocking out their pride. So just think about that. Kind of an interesting, you're going to do the full.
That's interesting. And you know what, David? You're fired is like
yeah, right.
out of the garden.
The full literary.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's it. That's all I have. Because my pride only goes that far. I can't tell you anything.
Marjorie Nielsen, do I see you?
I wanted to ask something without a picture.
Okay.
Just to address white supremacists and white pride and this surge in Trump.
So I haven't really thought about that, but it's really interesting because we're talking about how we value pride in marginalized people, but we don't value a kind of pride, the kind of pride that Donald Trump represents, the overweening, show-offy, blowhard, self-promoting pride. But I think that it's interesting to think, and I know this is anathema here, but to think about white supremacist pride, white pride, as a real signal to the world that these people are failing. I think it's a signal that they're failing, that they, who have been powerful for so long and controlled so many lives, and I don't want to get all down on the white race, but who've been in charge for so long, now feel the need to have their own marginalized movement. It's astonishing. They should, if they really felt powerful, they would just behave powerfully. They wouldn't imitate marginalized peoples. But, you know, I can't speak for them because I can't understand their behaviors. What do you think, Marjorie? Do you have a thought? You know, she just left, probably. Raise the question and go.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Do you have any thoughts about it yourself? Who posed the question?
It usually is out of weakness comes that kind of anger and rage.
Yeah.
And feeling supplanted, perhaps. So, and there is no shame.
Feeling replaced, as they say. Yeah, and no shame.
No shame. But it's
You-
clear.
I would disagree with Marjorie. I think there's a great deal of shame. I think that
Ah,
white pride is born of shame. That the people, white people who tend to be part of the white pride movement, white supremacist movement, are people less well-to-do people, less educated people not the movers and shakers of our society by and large. The white pride and black pride and gay pride and other words that are pride, they all seem to speak to a different kind of thing.
Okay, well, now I'm here. Because that's not really the case any longer. There are actually quite many middle class and
Also, I disagree with that because I don't think that those people who you're describing, David, are feeling shame. Maybe I don't really understand the definition of shame, but I think they're feeling fear and insecurity. And I think one thing that puts them in the same boat with other marginalized communities is they feel marginalized by the white elite. And I think that's a little bit of what you're saying. So that there's this whole elite above those people that makes them feel marginalized, hence the reaction against the Clintons, et cetera.
And I don't think it's accidental that and the Tea Party and that gained so much steam when we had our first black president.
Oh, no, it's not accidental.
And that I think for a lot of people, who were less well-to-do, less educated white people, when they saw a black man rise up in a very traditional way and they looked at themselves still where they are, that was shame. And
Shame,
and
yeah.
it chose to present itself as this twisted pride, but
wrath.
and
Pride,
wrath and envy and probably a lot of other stuff, but I think that what was born of. But I
Yeah.
actually saw that Enoch had his hand up
And
too. So.
yes, Enoch, and then I see Ruth. Hi, Enoch.
I really appreciate your introduction today and the examples of kind of pride in the beginning. You brought this to more an individual perspective of pride, and then you talk about the pride of marginalized groups in America, etc. I think it's a good discussion. So there is this personal connection with pride that we see in Trump and other people, but there is this sense of collective pride as well in America. And I don't know if I would agree with you completely with the idea that we despise pride and when we applaud humbleness. I think one of the elements that Trump was elected was this idea of this proud nation. Let's make America great again.
Mhm.
So, and I think there is, even though we in a personal level, in the relationships that we have, we despise pride in that way of power, individual. And I think our culture is so much built upon the idea of being confident in what you do. So how do you relate this idea, this collective desire for pride in our culture? So Trump was elected on that flag that was so much connected to pride and being an American and being part of this.
Yeah, I mean, when you say it like that, I get all disturbed because I start thinking about the Weimar Republic and then the rise to power of Hitler, and why did the Germans, who had incredible culture and literature and music, I mean, one of the greatest nations ever, why did they picture themselves as, and there are lots of answers for this, World War I and its resolution, for example. But why did they picture themselves as under siege and in need of making Germany great again? And why does America feel that it must make itself great again? And the lust for power, or the worship of power. I think it's not a return to the garden, because that implies a return to paradise, but it is a return to a desire to not be in charge of yourself and to have someone who has your best interest at heart take charge of you and fix things for you and eliminate the other who seems to be coming in and taking things away from you. That was the Jews in Germany. That's any person of color in America of Trump. And I think that is the thing. It's not that they value pride, it's that they wish somehow to be involved in pride and not to feel rejected and eliminated from the American narrative that they thought they were in charge of. I don't know if that answers your question. Probably not.
I think I think more I was looking for, Amy, is this relationship between the individual sense of pride and as a scene, and also this capital scene of collective pride for something. You know,
Interesting, because I never hear Black Lives Matter say, and maybe they do, but they seem to be talking about their collective pride as a community rather than the grand American power to represent them as a part of their pride. So I don't know, but I think it's a white movement that wants to see this great collective pride in America. And of course, we all would like to be able to be proud of America in a healthy way, but perhaps not in a fascistic way, which is part of what's going on here. Ruth, did you have another question, or did you decide that your question?
Actually, I started responding to Ellie, but somehow I didn't get it to her, because she was saying that basically people, what did she say? I have to get this here. That it's not about someone's upbringing, but that pride is ultimately driven by a sense of inadequacy. And that really may be true. My response to that is that the concept of pride has really evolved over the centuries. And when the 7 deadly sins were named and described, we had no concept of personal inadequacy. Right. Pride was the opposite, was not the opposite of shame, which it is now. I'm gay and I'm proud, I'm gay and I'm ashamed. It is that we have going on now. But then pride was the opposite of fear of God. Pride is that God told me not to eat from that tree and I don't care. I'm eating from that tree anyway. I do not fear God. I do not fear authority. I do not fear anything. I put myself above, my little human self above. So pride has a different concept, and it's lost a relationship to a higher being, and it's lost a relationship to accountability to a higher law, and it becomes a completely different concept altogether. But reconciling the idea of what it was for pride to be a 7 deadly sin, like envy and gluttony and all these other ones, is really complicated. And I think that maybe when it comes to this particular deadly sin, of course, Amy chose the most complicated, is very different than something like gluttony or lust, which is much easier to categorize and hasn't over time changed kind of fundamentally the idea of what it is. Does that make sense?
Yes. That absolutely makes sense. And you know, what's really interesting about that is that the very feeling of the word has changed. The feeling of the word pride has changed. Whereas we all know what lust is. We all know that it's sinful to lust. Jimmy Carter brought that right home to us, that he lusted in his heart. And he made us recognize again the very harshness of the sinful quality of lust. But when we say pride, it has lost that. And I think Ruth is really right that for Western society, that idea of an all-powerful morality is gone. And, you know, I can't say, as I've said in my talk, I can't say that this saddens me deeply. But then when I see pride rise up again in someone like Trump, I begin to think like, well, I wish we had an all-encompassing morality that we all trusted and believed in, so that we wouldn't fall for shamans and quacks and buffoons like this guy. Jim and Beth, I see your blue hand.
Yeah, so I just wanted, as the white Southern boy here,
I always forget, yeah.
who I have who I've talked to you about this, Amy, is this sort of experience of reasonable, appropriate shame for things that took place in my ancestral past. And I just was thinking about it when you're talking about white supremacists, that they're they're using pride as a reaction to what they consider to be an enforced shame put upon them. And so they're reacting to that by using pride to motivate themselves. So I don't know that it comes because they're not aware of the appropriate amount of shame. They're blind to that they should have a certain reasonable amount of shame, right? And so they're reacting with this pride in order to sort of rectify a wrong in their mind. So they don't, I think David said earlier, it comes from shame. I think it does come from shame, but they don't really feel it. They think, I won't absorb any shame for this. I didn't do that. I had nothing to do with that. And therefore I need to be prideful and not be pushed down by somebody's imposed shame put on me. And I say that also as a son of a man who used that as a parenting technique, you know what I mean, to shame me. I really wished he had beaten me. It would have been a lot easier than being shamed as a child. So anyway, this is something I was thinking of when you were talking
I
about.
think it's really interesting, and I would love to have this conversation in the South, because I think that there's a group of people who feel shame for their ancestral past in the South because they actually participated in their families in the exploitation of people now considered marginalized who were their enslaved workers. And then there's a whole other bunch of people in the South, because the Southern culture is very complicated, who didn't exactly, advance so much. They had white privilege, yes, but they didn't advance like the people who feel a just amount of shame, and they don't want to feel that shame. And not that anyone's actually thinking about like who was a slaveholder and who wasn't, and how many families back it was, but there's some kind of class difference there too going on with the people who feel their appropriate shame and the people who shun their appropriate shame. So this is beyond the issue of pride, obviously, but I do think it's very hard to find pride when you're also plagued by a very serious degree of shame historically. And I was thinking about something else. It's so hard to have too many thoughts in a very tiny brain at this point in the evening.
And
Maybe
speaking
someone
of-
else has another thought that they
Well,
could.
Amy, if you don't mind, I'm just looking at the time that we're 8:10. So if you want to say something else, or somebody else does.
I want to say one thing, okay? And it's just personal. I feel myself to be a very proud person in that I like to be a little bit removed and not like always out there openly discussing all my feelings and like that. But I've never really known what it is to be like proud and to assert like either an identity of pride or pride of achievement. I'm envious. I want to have more achievements and be more everything. Now I failed to rise to pride of the deadly sin anyway. And I wondered if other people feel that same. I feel almost inadequate in America today that I can't rise to that feeling of sort of self-confidence or self-esteem. Who said self-esteem? You, David, that you teach your children self-esteem. And that's so important. And I don't believe that I ever was taught that.
Well, I think you're terrific. So
Well, good. See,
if
that's
it helps,
why I need
if
David
it helps.
in my life. But I think it's a very hard thing to come to. And it's part of what makes Trump so astonishing is that for a man who deserves to have so little, he has so much. Oh. Okey doke, we'll see what he does next, people.
Well, and on that note, I want to say thank you so much, Amy. This was wonderful. And thank you guys all for joining us. But that was great. That was like Marty before you. And tune in again on December 9th. Hayapin, who I know has been on this call, will be here with Gluttony. And if you've enjoyed this this series, please tell a friend and bring a friend. And yeah, anyone else, any last thing you want to say?
Thank you. I thought it was great.
Thanks a lot, David. I really appreciate it. And thanks to Big Sunday for putting it on.
Yeah, well, thanks, Amy. That was great. Thank you guys all so much for being here, and hope to see you at Thanksgiving. And if I don't, have a very happy
Thanks,
one.
David.
Have a
Thanks,
very nice
David.
one. All right, good night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Amy.
Yes, of course.
Thanks.